Honestly, I feel unwelcome in my own home, and I feel like we're growing apart. I mean, we're sleeping in separate rooms sometimes. It's become weird.
If he wants to go, then he can go. I want somebody more mature. And if you can't be mature for me, maybe I don't want this.
Jovi and Yara spent years fighting because Jovi was never home. Now he is finally home, and somehow their marriage looks closer to breaking than ever. They are sleeping in separate rooms sometimes. Yara says she wants somebody more mature. Jovi admits divorce is at least a possibility. And what begins as another argument about chores, drinking, and responsibility ends with Jovi packing a bag and leaving the house. But I really don't think this story is just about Jovi sitting around drinking beer. Because if you look at their history, there is a much bigger contradiction sitting right in front of us. For years, Yara wanted Jovi home more. She hated those long stretches when his offshore job took him away from the family. She worried about raising Mila almost like a single mother whenever he disappeared for work. Jovi even turned down an opportunity that could have kept him closer to home without discussing it with Yara first. And that became another major fight between them. So now that he has finally stepped away from that lifestyle, shouldn't this be exactly what Yara wanted? Apparently not. Instead of becoming closer, these two seem more disconnected. And that raises a question that is much more uncomfortable than anything shown in one argument. What if Jovi's job was never the real problem? What if all that time apart was actually hiding problems they didn't have to deal with every day? Because when a husband is away for weeks, you can blame the distance, you can blame the schedule. You can tell yourself everything would be different if only he were home. But once he is home and the relationship still feels empty, suddenly you lose that excuse. Then you have to look directly at each other. And that may be where Jovi and Yara are right now. There are also rumors circulating online about Yara allegedly being involved with somebody else. Those claims are not confirmed, and I want to make that very clear from the beginning. There is a big difference between online gossip and something either Yara, Jovi, or TLC has actually confirmed. But the fact that viewers are even willing to believe those rumors tells us something about how unstable this marriage now looks from the outside. The latest conflict begins with something that sounds almost ordinary. Jovi is home with Mila. They are spending time together. They're playing, having fun. And Jovi looks like a father who is genuinely enjoying being around his daughter. And honestly, that part matters, because for years, one of Yara's biggest complaints was that Jovi's work schedule took him away from Mila too much. So on one level, this should be a positive development. Jovi has time with his daughter. He is not disappearing offshore. Financially, according to him, the family is comfortable enough for him to take a break. After spending so many years in a demanding career, I can understand why somebody would say, I worked hard for this. I want to breathe for a while. That by itself does not make Jovi irresponsible. The problem begins when his idea of taking a break and Yara's idea of being a partner appear to be completely different. Yara looks at Jovi being home and seems to think, great now, we can finally share the responsibilities. Jovi looks at being home and seems to think, great now, I can finally stop having responsibilities for a while. That difference sounds small until you actually live with somebody. Because who decided what this break was supposed to look like? Did they ever sit down and say, Jovi, you are not working offshore anymore, so what happens now? Who handles the house? Who handles school routines? Who does what with Mila? How long is Jovi planning to take off? Is this 1 month? 3 months? A year? When does he start looking for another job? How often is he going out with friends? And what does Yara expect from him during the day? If those conversations never happened properly, then Jovi and Yara are not fighting over chores. They are fighting because they entered the same situation with two completely different agreements in their heads. Yara apparently believes that if Jovi is home and she is working, then he should naturally pick up more of the everyday responsibilities. Jovi seems to believe that because he spent years earning good money and living around a difficult work schedule, he has earned the right to simply enjoy some downtime. And here's the important part. Both positions can have some logic behind them. Jovi can deserve a break. Yara can still expect help. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Where Jovi loses sympathy, at least for me, is when the break starts sounding less like recovery and more like an indefinite lifestyle. He openly admits he does as little as he can because he wants to relax. That is where Yara's frustration becomes easier to understand. Because imagine being the partner who spent years saying, I need you here. Then the person finally comes home, but instead of feeling like you gained a partner, you feel like you gained another person you have to manage. That is probably not what Yara meant when she asked Jovi to be around more. At the same time, though, I think there is another side of Jovi's behavior that deserves more analysis than simply calling him lazy. This man has spent a huge part of his adult life working in a very specialized offshore career. That kind of work does not just give you money, it gives you structure. You know when you are leaving. You know what your responsibilities are. You know what role you are playing. You have colleagues. You have routines. You have an identity outside your marriage. Now take all of that away. Suddenly, Jovi is home. There is no offshore schedule telling him what to do. There is no job giving him structure. There may be no immediate financial pressure forcing him to find something else. And now Yara is standing there telling him what needs to be done. I can see why somebody like Jovi might interpret that as pressure instead of partnership. That does not make his reaction healthy. But psychologically, it does make it more interesting. He may not simply be avoiding chores. He may be struggling with a loss of identity. And if that's true, drinking, going out, hanging around with friends, and resisting Yara's requests could all be ways of protecting the old version of himself. The problem is that Yara has changed too. She is no longer the woman viewers first met who was trying to adjust to a new country while depending heavily on Jovi. She has built her own public profile. She promotes businesses. She works with brands. She has her own project. She is raising a daughter. She appears to be moving forward. So while Jovi may be trying to slow down for the first time in years, Yara seems to be accelerating. And suddenly, they are moving through adulthood in opposite directions. That makes Yara's comment about wanting somebody more mature much more significant. She is not saying, please wash the dishes. She is questioning whether Jovi is still the kind of partner she wants. That is a completely different level of conflict. And then we get to Jovi's drinking, because obviously that has been part of this relationship for years. This is not a brand new accusation Yara invented because he stopped working. Partying, nightlife, strip clubs, and alcohol have repeatedly created tension between them. We have seen versions of this argument again and again. That history changes the meaning of what Yara is seeing now. If somebody has never had a drinking-related conflict in their marriage, and they have a beer during a break from work, maybe their partner thinks nothing of it. But if alcohol and nightlife have already caused multiple fights, trust issues, embarrassment, and insecurity, then seeing that same person suddenly spending more time at home without a job, while still wanting to drink and go out, is going to trigger old fears. Yara is probably not reacting only to the beer in his hand. She is reacting to everything that beer represents to her. And I think Jovi makes a similar mistake with Yara's criticism. He hears her asking about chores and responsibilities, but he interprets it as controlling behavior. To Jovi, the message seems to be, you are trying to boss me around. To Yara, the message seems to be, I am begging my husband to behave like my partner. That's why they cannot resolve the argument. They are not even hearing the same conversation. Yara says responsibility. Jovi hears control. Jovi says freedom. Yara hears abandonment. Yara says maturity. Jovi hears criticism. Jovi says he deserves a break. Yara hears another excuse. When couples reach that point, even neutral behavior starts getting interpreted in the worst possible way. And that is where I think the real danger is. Because one of the most revealing moments is not when Yara gets angry. It is when she becomes calm. She basically reaches the point of saying, go drink, go out with your friends, do whatever makes you happy. I don't care anymore. People sometimes think less fighting means a relationship is improving. Not always. Sometimes less fighting means somebody has stopped believing the argument is worth having. There is a huge emotional difference between saying, please change because this matters to me, and saying, do whatever you want. The first person is still trying to influence the relationship. The second person may already be emotionally walking away, and Yara's tone is what makes that moment uncomfortable. She does not sound like she is threatening Jovi just to scare him. She sounds tired. That kind of exhaustion can be much harder to repair than anger, because anger still contains energy. Indifference does not. But Jovi also seems emotionally exhausted in his own way. He says he feels unwelcome in his own home. He says they are growing apart. He admits they sometimes sleep separately. And when Georgie asks whether divorce is still something Jovi is considering, Jovi does not completely shut the idea down. He basically says he is not ready to divorce right now, but it is possible. That matters, because people can say dramatic things in arguments, especially on reality television. But when somebody calmly tells a friend that divorce is a possibility, it suggests the thought has existed outside one explosive fight. And Jovi has apparently discussed divorce before. So this isn't simply Yara suddenly threatening the marriage while Jovi is shocked. Both of them appear to have entertained the idea that this may not work. That changes the emotional balance. They're not fighting to prove the other person wrong anymore. They may be evaluating whether they still want the relationship. And Georgi's role here is surprisingly interesting, because he actually tries to get Jovi to compromise. He suggests Yara may simply want more time with her husband. Jovi pushes back. He says he has tried. He complains that Yara doesn't want to go out. But again, I think Jovi is confusing spending time together with doing what he wants to do together. If Yara is working, handling responsibilities, and mentally exhausted, she may not want nightlife. That does not automatically mean she doesn't want her husband. Maybe she wants dinner. Maybe she wants a quiet evening. Maybe she wants help first, then connection. Jovi seems to think I offered to go out, she said no, therefore I tried. But compromise is not repeatedly offering your preferred activity until the other person accepts it. Real compromise requires curiosity. What would make Yara feel connected? What would make Jovi feel less controlled? Can Jovi have independence without disappearing? Can Yara communicate expectations without sounding like his supervisor? Neither one seems particularly good at asking those questions. Instead, they keep returning to the same roles. Yara becomes the frustrated parent. Jovi becomes the rebellious teenager. And once that dynamic takes over a marriage, attraction can suffer too. Nobody wants to feel like they are parenting their spouse. And nobody wants to feel like their spouse is constantly grading their behavior. This is why I think Yara saying Jovi never grew up hits much deeper than a normal insult. Jovi may hear disrespect. Yara may genuinely be describing how she experiences their relationship. And Jovi's response is to leave. Now, I don't want to say he deliberately manufactured the entire argument just so he could get a hotel by the beach. We cannot know his private motivation. But the timing does make it fair to question whether Jovi had already emotionally decided he wanted space before the conversation really started. He arrives already defensive. He refuses small household expectations. He talks about it being his house, too. He emphasizes freedom. Then, when the argument escalates, leaving becomes the solution. That pattern matters, because sometimes people do not consciously create fights to escape. But if leaving gives them relief, they may start behaving in ways that make conflict more likely. That's different from saying Jovi planned everything. I'm saying his behavior may be reinforcing an escape cycle. He feels criticized, he gets defensive, Yara becomes more frustrated, he feels even more attacked. Then he leaves. Leaving makes him feel free. That relief can accidentally teach him that conflict is his exit door. Meanwhile, every time he leaves, Yara's fear that he will never truly prioritize the family becomes stronger. So both people end up confirming the worst thing they already believe about each other. Jovi thinks Yara controls him. Yara thinks Jovi runs away from adulthood. And each fight becomes evident. That brings us back to something from their earlier seasons that I think is very important. Jovi and Yara have both made major decisions without fully involving the other person. Yara secretly stayed on birth control because she was not ready for another child. Jovi turned down a closer-to-home work opportunity without discussing it with her. Those are completely different decisions, but they reveal a similar relationship problem. When either person fears how the other will respond, they sometimes seem more comfortable acting first and explaining later. That is a trust problem. Healthy couples do not have to agree on everything. But they need to believe difficult conversations are safe enough to have before major decisions get made. Jovi and Yara have repeatedly struggled with that. And if communication already feels unsafe, then even small issues become secretive. Money, work, parenting, going out, future children, where to live. All of these decisions start feeling like negotiations where somebody has to win. This is also why I wouldn't reduce their current situation to culture. Yes, Yara came from Ukraine. Jovi is American. They have dealt with cultural differences before. Yara's relationship with Europe and her family has affected major decisions. But this particular problem feels much more universal. This is about domestic labor, identity, marriage expectations, parenting, freedom, and resentment. You could put this couple in almost any country and those conflicts would still exist. Another major factor is Mila, and I think both Jovi and Yara understand that at least on some level. Repeated fighting is not just exhausting for them anymore. there is a child living inside that environment. That doesn't mean parents have to stay married at any cost. Sometimes separation is healthier than living inside constant hostility. But it does mean they cannot keep treating every argument like a private war between two adults. Their decisions now shape what Mila sees as normal communication. Does she see two parents who can disagree and eventually repair? Or does she see criticism, defensiveness, leaving, separate rooms, and emotional withdrawal? That is where this stops being a funny reality television argument about beer and dirty shoes. The stakes are much bigger, and viewers are extremely divided about who deserves more blame. Some fans feel Yara has finally reached the end of her patience. That side of the audience looks at Jovi's history with nightlife, the strip club arguments, his work decisions, and now his resistance to responsibilities at home and says, how many times is she supposed to explain the same thing? From that perspective, Yara did not suddenly wake up and decide Jovi was immature. She has been complaining about versions of the same problem for years. Many viewers are basically saying Jovi wanted the benefits of marriage and fatherhood without fully giving up the lifestyle he had before those responsibilities existed. But another section of the audience feels Jovi deserves more understanding. They point out that he spent years working a demanding offshore job, earning money, supporting his family, and missing huge amounts of normal life. Now he finally has time with his daughter. If the family is financially secure, some viewers ask why he should immediately be treated like a failure because he is not rushing into another job. And that argument has merit. If Yara had stopped working and become a stay-at-home mother, people would hopefully recognize childcare as real work. So Jovi spending time with Mila cannot simply be dismissed. The question is whether he is actually functioning as a stay-at-home parent or using that label to describe a much looser lifestyle. Those are not the same thing. Being a stay-at-home dad still means running a household. It means schedules, food, cleaning, school, appointments, planning. It doesn't mean playing with your child for a few hours and then declaring the rest of adulthood optional. That's where fans defending Jovi still have to confront what Jovi himself appears to admit. He wants to do as little as possible for now. And that may be exactly what Yara cannot tolerate anymore. Then there is a third group of viewers who think some of this could be exaggerated for television. And I understand that skepticism, because Jovi and Yara have had dramatic storylines on screen, while appearing much happier together in social media posts at other times. Reality TV is still television. Scenes are edited. Conflict gets emphasized. Production asks questions. Couples may film issues long after the actual emotional moment happened. And social media only shows another edited version of life. So I would not use one Instagram vacation photo to say everything is perfect. And I would not use one explosive episode to say their marriage is definitely over. Both can be misleading. That becomes especially important when we talk about the cheating rumors. Some social media accounts have circulated claims that Yara was allegedly involved with another man and supposedly spent major holidays with him. Again, those claims remain allegations. We do not have a public confirmation from Yara. We do not have a public confirmation from Jovi. We do not have TLC confirming an affair. So anybody presenting that as established fact is moving faster than the evidence. Could something eventually come out? Of course. Reality TV relationships surprise us all the time. But previous problems in a marriage do not prove a new rumor. And Yara saying she wants somebody more mature does not prove she already found somebody else. That's exactly where commentary channels need to be careful. We can analyze why fans believe a rumor without pretending the rumor is true. And honestly, we don't even need the cheating allegation to make this story dramatic. Separate bedrooms are already serious. Divorce being discussed is serious. Yara emotionally checking out is serious. Jovi packing a bag and leaving is serious. The confirmed relationship problems are strong enough. But there is one deeper theory about Jovi and Yara that I think explains almost everything we are watching. What if distance was actually helping their marriage survive? Think about the structure they lived with for years. Jovi would leave for work. Yara would complain that he was gone. She would miss him, resent him, or both. Eventually, Jovi would return. There would be excitement, travel, reconnection, maybe another fight. Then work would separate them again. That schedule created forced breaks from each other. Every reunion could feel slightly like a fresh start. They did not have to live normal daily life together every single day for months without interruption. Now remove the offshore schedule. No forced separation, no dramatic reunion, no built-in reset. Just daily life. Laundry, school, work, parenting, cleaning, boredom, dinner, bills, who takes out the trash, who wants to go out, who wants to stay home. That is where compatibility gets tested differently. Maybe Jovi and Yara were always good at missing each other and never as good at simply living together. That is the question this episode accidentally raises. And if that's true, Jovi quitting offshore work didn't create the problem. It exposed it. The same thing may be happening with their individual identities. Jovi built his adult identity around work, money, travel, and freedom. Yara built more of her identity after becoming a mother. She developed businesses, she created her own income opportunities, she became more independent. So now the marriage has reached a strange reversal. The person who once wanted her husband home is busy building things. The person who once had the demanding career wants to relax. Yara may look at Jovi and think, I grew up because life forced me to. Jovi may look at Yara and think, I worked hard enough that I should finally be allowed to enjoy myself. Neither person necessarily sees themselves as the problem. That is why this conflict is so difficult. There is no single solution like Jovi gets a job tomorrow. Because even if Jovi gets another job, the communication problem stays, the resentment stays, the drinking arguments stay, the freedom versus responsibility conflict stays, the question of whether Yara respects Jovi stays, the question of whether Jovi feels emotionally safe around Yara stays. That's also why I don't think divorce is guaranteed. Jovi and Yara have survived serious conflicts before. They have gone through trust issues, parenting disagreements, career fights, nightlife drama, arguments about another child, arguments about living closer to Yara's family. They have reached breaking points before and still stayed together. So the smartest prediction is not, they're definitely getting divorced. The smarter prediction is that their next chapter depends on whether they finally address the pattern instead of the latest argument. If Jovi simply gets another job but nothing else changes, they will find a new thing to fight about. If Yara stops mentioning chores but still sees Jovi as immature, that resentment will show up somewhere else. If Jovi stops drinking during the day but still believes Yara is controlling him, that feeling will return during the next disagreement. They have to solve the interpretation problem. Can Yara ask for partnership without becoming Jovi's manager? Can Jovi ask for freedom without behaving like family responsibility is a prison? Can they define what his break actually looks like? Can they create a schedule they both agree on? Can Jovi spend time with friends without every outing triggering Yara's history with his nightlife? Can Yara respect Jovi's need for independence while still expecting him to participate in the home? Those are difficult questions, but they are much more important than who won the argument. I also think Yara's somebody more mature comment could become the sentence that defines their next storyline. Because once you start criticizing behavior, change is possible. But when you start criticizing identity, things become more dangerous. There is a difference between saying, I hate when you drink too much, and saying, you are immature. One attacks the action, the other attacks who the person is. And Jovi does the same thing in reverse when he describes home like a prison. He isn't simply saying, I don't like being told what chores to do. He is describing the marriage environment as something restricting his freedom. That language tells me both of them are beginning to see the relationship itself as the problem. Yara sees Jovi as somebody holding her back from the mature partnership she wants. Jovi sees Yara as somebody preventing him from living freely. If those beliefs become permanent, then yes, separation becomes much more realistic. But if this is a temporary identity crisis after a massive lifestyle change, then there is still something to work with. And that is why Jovi's next career move matters. If he finds work closer to Miami, creates structure again, remains more available to Mila, and still contributes at home, then we will learn whether the current tension was partly caused by this transition. If he does that, and Yara is still completely emotionally disconnected, then the problem is probably much deeper. And if he stays home indefinitely while continuing to drink, go out, resist responsibilities, and complain about being controlled, I don't see Yara becoming more patient. I see her becoming more detached. And once emotional separation lasts long enough, the legal separation sometimes follows later. The bigger question is not whether Jovi and Yara fight again. Of course they will fight again. The bigger question is whether they still repair afterward. Do they return to the same bedroom? Do they actually spend meaningful time together? Does Jovi start thinking about what Yara needs instead of only defending his freedom? Does Yara start talking to Jovi like a partner instead of somebody she has lost respect for? Because respect may be the biggest thing disappearing here. And a marriage can survive anger It can survive periods of distance. It can survive career changes. Some marriages even survive major betrayals. But once both people lose respect for each other, everything becomes harder. Every joke sounds insulting. Every request sounds controlling. Every night out looks selfish. Every criticism feels personal. Every disagreement confirms that you married the wrong person. That is the direction Jovi and Yara need to avoid. So when I look at this entire situation, I don't see a simple story about Jovi becoming unemployed and Yara getting angry. I see two people who finally got rid of one of the biggest excuses they had for why their marriage was difficult. Jovi is home, the distance is gone, and the relationship is still struggling, maybe even more than before. That does not mean Yara was wrong to want him home. It means physical presence cannot fix emotional disconnection. Jovi can sit inside the same apartment every day and still make Yara feel alone. Yara can live beside Jovi every day and still make him feel unwanted. That is why separate bedrooms are more concerning to me than another argument over beer. That is why Yara calmly saying she doesn't care anymore matters more than yelling. And that is why Jovi admitting divorce is possible deserves more attention than whatever rumor is trending online this week. The cheating allegations may eventually be proven true or false. Right now, they remain allegations. But the marriage crisis itself is not a rumor. We have watched trust issues develop for years. We have watched them disagree about work. We have watched them disagree about nightlife. We have watched them disagree about children. We have watched them make major decisions without fully involving each other. And now we are watching the one thing Yara asked for having Jovi home fail to create the closeness she expected. That may be the most revealing part of the entire story. Because maybe the question was never, can Jovi spend more time at home? Maybe the real question has always been, when Jovi is home, do these two actually know how to be happy together? And right now I'm not sure either of them knows the answer. So what do you think? Did Jovi leaving his offshore lifestyle expose problems that were already hiding underneath this marriage? Or do you think Yara is being too hard on a husband who worked for years and finally wants some time to enjoy his life? And more importantly, when Yara says she wants somebody more mature, do you think that's frustration talking, or is that the moment she is emotionally telling us she has already started imagining a life without Jovi?